video is sponsored by Instant Gaming. Instant Gaming offers a huge range of discounted games including Planet Coaster and all of its DLCs, along with loads of amazing other titles. You can check out what's on offer using my affiliate link in the description. I really like building custom supports, like a lot. It's what I spend most of my time doing in Planet Coaster, if it's not for building some insane creation. I just really love doing them, and today I'm going to try and convince you to really love doing them too. This tutorial is going to be the full complete guide to teach you how to custom support your coaster. I've had a lot of practice with this recently, as my next park will have all of its coasters entirely custom supported, some of them using over 1,000 pieces to do so, so it's something I'm very passionate about doing. And if you've ever built anything in Planet Coaster, you will know that the in-game supports look terrible. Now sit back and try to relax, because you'll probably need some custom supporting yourself after this. This is how to do custom supporting in Planet Coaster. What are custom supports? Custom supports are primarily custom supporting your coaster. You're not using the in-game default ones, you're making your own out of in-game pieces. You'd normally be able to spot them because they look a lot more realistic and probably more creative as well. But why do we use them? We use custom supports because of their accuracy. If you're going for a really realistic coaster, this is the best way to do that. You don't have to deal with the in-game supports not loading because of paths or other landscaping features. You can just make your own, do it completely custom, and they will be exactly how you want them to be. This can take just any standard looking coaster that looks like it was made in Planet Coaster into something that makes it look like it was made in NoTrackLimits or in real life. It just makes your creations look better, more realistic, and more professional. So, how do you make these custom supports? Well, first off, you need to think about realism. And in terms of realism, the most important thing I'd say when you're designing these custom supports, so you know what you're doing, is thinking of where the forces are going on the coaster and on the track. Primarily, you need to consider two forces: the vertical force of gravity, pulling the track and the supports down to the earth, and then also what force the train will exert on that piece of track while it's running through it. Most of the time your supports will look like this. They will have a vertical element carrying down the weight of the track into the ground, but this will probably also carry the weight of the train into the ground as it passes over. Then most of the time you will also have an angled element that will be supporting the vertical support and assisting in any other forces that the train deals out on the track as it goes over that section. Supports are normally made out of a few simple components. You will normally have the main support beam, the support footers, flanges which connect pieces of supports together, and track connection pieces that actually connect the support to the track. I just thought it would be a good thing to mention that you add flanges basically where that piece of support connects to another piece of support. The main idea is that you would have to think about how the park would transport that support from where it's manufactured to where it's going to be placed. That's why you quite often see really big lattice support structures like on top hats or other elements made out of many multiple pieces because of how they've had to transport that piece from the coaster manufacturing place to the park. Most of the time when you're building, you'll encounter two main types of supports. There's sit-down coaster supports or inverted coaster supports. You can also add custom supports to wooden coasters, but these only tend to be bracing supports that are additions to the in-game supports because they're normally not that bad. If you're going to custom support an entire wooden coaster, you will be genuinely insane. Now I'm just going to show some examples of what a few key coaster support elements will look like on a sit-down coaster, starting with the lift hill. With the lift hill, you want it to be well supported with the supports evenly separated. Ideally, you wouldn't just have these going straight down, you'd have bracing on one or both sides. The next element is the loop. This is one I see quite a lot of people getting wrong, so you need to support it from both sides ideally, maybe even slightly above the halfway point, and then you need a couple of supports that join like, I don't know, halfway between the bottom and the middle, and then probably right at the bottom as well, because that'll be one of the most forceful points. The zero G roll is another one that I see people struggle with quite often. It needs to be supported pretty much evenly on both sides, but you would obviously not put a support right at the peak of the inversion because that's probably the least forceful part on the track, and obviously this point is 180 degrees directly upside down, so you don't want to be supporting this part. Probably one of the most challenging elements to support is a stall. It needs to be quite evenly supported on the entry and exit, but on the actual stall part, you don't really need much support on the track. The train isn't going insanely fast at this point, it's not pulling down because you kind of get like weak floater almost. You don't really get much hang time because of the shape of it. So there isn't actually that much force pulling down on the track when the train's going through it, that much more than there would be under its normal weight anyway. Similar to the 0G roll really, you want even support on the entry and the exit, but you don't need any at the peak of the inversion. Just kind of a constant force that goes all the way around this inversion, so if you support it enough on the entry and the exit, that'll be perfectly fine. I'd say the Cobra roll is probably one of the most complex inversions to custom support because there's many different ways of doing it. Obviously there's a lot of real life precedents you can use for all of these, but even they're all different. Like you need to support the actual bottom side of the Cobra roll, the entry to it, but then some of them support the Cobra roll at the peaks of the two inversions, some don't. So this is just a case of looking at different ones for how it works, but you always need to support basically the main high stress areas of the track. Airtime hills are always a weird one because at the actual peak of the airtime hill, there is literally no force pushing down on the track other than its own weight. So that most of the time is enough to support it if you support the entry and the exit of it. Because obviously when you get airtime, the train and you is like pulling up on that part of the track. So there's no real like heavy stress under it or over it, just enough to support its own weight really. In most cases, like you'll see this on real coasters, you could leave the peak of it without support. For inverted coasters, it's mostly the same, but obviously it's a little bit different as well because you're supporting the coaster from above as opposed to underneath. For the lift hill, you need to remember that the actual catwalk isn't attached to the track like it is on the standard sit-down coaster. It's kind of almost suspended around it. So you need to accommodate the extra room for that and almost create like a beam across the top of the track, wide enough to fit the track and the catwalk in, and then the side beams running down the side. Same way with loops, you need to support these, I don't know, just a little bit differently, especially on inverted coasters how the loops are normally smaller and taken at quite a bit more of a speed and more intense. So you need to support the inside of it and the bottom of it quite heavily. Obviously not the top, same way for sit down loops, you never support the top of a loop. But on B&M inverts specifically, they normally have these like thicker beams that are on the highest supports that almost like mould into the track just to give that top portion a bit of extra support. 0G rolls on an inverted coaster are probably one of the most different elements to a sit-down coaster because of the way they're profiled. Obviously the top of it is more elongated and flat compared to a normal 0G roll on a sit-down coaster just because of how you sit on an inverted coaster. So you would probably best to be put support at the point where it's directly 180 degrees upside down, and then obviously support this evenly on the run up and the run down from that. Obviously sit-down coasters have helixes, but they're not really treated the same, they're just treated like normal track sections. Whereas on an invert, a helix can almost go around one central support because it's probably going to be the most forceful part of the ride. You can support it in a variety of ways, like I've just said, around one single support, or around a couple that are quite close together, probably quite chunky supports that sustain that heavy force as you're going around the element. Same thing I said earlier about 0G rolls, corkscrews are obviously profiled a little bit differently on inverts, and obviously you're supporting it from above the track or below it, so you would want a support probably at the peak of the inversion and in the run up to it. And just elements on inverts in general are normally just a little bit more forceful, so you need to accommodate for that. And talking of intensity, a Cobra roll is probably one of the most stressful parts of an inverted coaster, especially for the track and the supports. So a Cobra roll, because of how tight the maneuver is and how fast it would normally be doing it, this needs to be really beefy, but again supported in pretty much the same places. And I hope that was a really helpful rundown of how to custom support and just loads of examples on custom supporting, because that's probably more helpful actually, just to see the different elements and how you should custom support them, because obviously you can learn from these examples, and when you're a bit confused while you're custom supporting your actual coasters, you can refer back to this video, look at some reference images, and then you'll know where to go from there. But I'd say the most important thing is just to research it yourself. Different manufacturers have different supports. B&M inverts look drastically different from a Vekoma invert, for instance, like the supports on there, or even little differences like say if you've got an Intamin multi-launch coaster or a Mack multi-launch coaster. There's little like subtle differences between the supports that can really nail the realism that you're going for. So I'd say the two things that you need to remember the most are just think of where the forces are going, and obviously it varies for different manufacturers what they look like, so just look at reference images, look at the videos and images I've showed you in this video, and that will help you to custom support your rides. And now I thought I'd just end this video with some helpful tips that I've kind of learned along the way of custom supporting loads of my coasters gradually over time. So my first tip is when you are using supports over water, you ideally want the concrete footer to be out of the water. You can do this by adding a separate concrete like extension of the footer piece on the bottom of it. This is just because you don't really want like the metal of the supports and the bolts underwater because they can rust over time, so it's just a little realism thing. Keep them out of the water. Next one is you can group your supports into almost like a lattice structure. When you've got quite a complex element, say if you've got like, I don't know, a really big element or a top hat, you wouldn't have loads of little supports for each like individual piece of track. You would have like a big lattice structure that evenly distributes all the stress throughout all the different supports, and it just looks a lot more realistic. You'll see this in lots of examples of like top hats or something, that it's not just a support for like every track piece, they create a bigger structure. So try going for that when you're making the supports for those larger elements. Once you've got your actual set of supports, the best thing you can do is just copy and paste them around. Like there's quite a lot of instances where you'll see in my time-lapse building that I'll just copy and paste supports because most of them are the same. Once you've got a support that's like straight down and then maybe a side supporting piece, you can use that same support loads. Like if you just copy it, extend it, and obviously shrink it for different heights, and you can just use the same ones over and over again. One of the challenges you'll probably face is working around paths. Now don't be afraid to put supports in paths. You'll see this quite a lot in real life, like if you've ever been to a theme park and you're able to walk underneath a coaster, then there'll probably be a support going through that path. Obviously the game doesn't even allow you to do that with the default supports, but that's one of the advantages of custom supporting. You can do whatever you want with the supports, so you can either have some sort of elaborate structure going over the path or just have the support go into the path. This goes back to the part that I was talking about making a lattice structure. You can also use the same support to support multiple pieces of track. So say if you have two pieces of track that are quite near each other, like side by side or one on top of each other, you can use sort of the same support lattice piece almost to support both of them pieces of track, or maybe two, or maybe like, I don't know, 57. Like the same group of supports or support doesn't have to just support one piece of track, it can support multiple. One thing you need to watch out for when you're making your own supports, because I think the game actually does this by itself, but is clearance. The best thing I would do to test this is while you're doing the supports, have the train come over that spot you're supporting and then pause it while it's on that portion. Then you can have a look how close the supports are getting, whether the guests would be able to reach them because they shouldn't be able to, and then that'll be a good gauge where you can see whether these supports are either too big, too small, too near the guests or whatever. If you're stuck, the best two things I can recommend are to look at precedent images. There's millions, well probably not millions, there's thousands of coasters that are out there in the world. They're all technically custom supported, like most of the time I'd imagine. So look at these coasters, there'll be loads of instances where it interacts with paths, interacts with other pieces of track, all sorts. The situation that you've probably got the problem with has probably already been solved before by someone else making a coaster. So just have a look at what other people are doing, have a look at real life coasters, and that will probably solve the situation for you. Or you could alternatively look in my Discord, send in a photo to the help chat, ask some people. They might be able to give you some support on what to do. It's a great community, you should join in. The last thing I'd say is just don't be afraid if it looks messy. Custom supports, even real life ones, still do. I've seen so many like real life coasters that have the weirdest support you've ever seen, and it's okay because it's been done before. Supports aren't meant to look like very aesthetic, I suppose. They're there to make the coaster not fall down and to distribute the stress like into the ground rather than through the track so that it lasts longer. The supports are there so that the coaster works, not so that it looks pretty. So if you're a bit worried about the way your support looks, obviously you can have a look at real life images, ask in my Discord, but most of the time they're not going to look perfect, and that's what I like about them. You can be really creative with them. They don't have to look perfect, but you can make some really weird shapes and stuff. So that's basically what I'm trying to say. If it looks a bit bad, it's fine. And that's pretty much all you need to know. You can custom support for the rest of your life, like I'm probably going to do. It's my favourite thing. Thank you for watching this video. If you've got any ideas for any of those tutorials, comment them down below. I might do a few more soon, depends when I have time in between now and the park series, like I said in the Discord a couple of days ago. There's going to be a couple of videos in between then and the park series. Vlog coming up soon as well, which I'm very excited for. Yeah, thank you for watching. See you later.